The Miami sun blazed down on the private tarmac as Scarlett Whitmore stood beside her $80 million Gulfstream G650, her designer heels clicking against the concrete. She pointed a manicured finger at Ezekiel Robinson and laughed. "Fly this jet perfectly, and maybe I'll consider marrying a man like you." Her entourage erupted in cruel laughter. But as Zeke stepped toward the cockpit with unsettling calm, something on his wrist caught the light. A Patek Philippe watch worth more than most people's homes. Scarlett's smirk faltered for just a heartbeat. Had she just made the biggest mistake of her life? Before we dive into this unbelievable story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if you think you know where this is headed, hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you have no idea what's coming next. This story will shake you to your core. Now let's rewind 3 days to see how we got here, because what happened at that charity gala will change everything you think you know about prejudice, power, and the price of arrogance. 3 nights before the tarmac showdown, the Fontainebleau Miami beach glittered like a jewel against the dark Atlantic waters. Inside the grand ballroom, baccarat crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors where Miami's elite gathered for the annual Oceanside Children's Foundation Gala. Women draped in Valentino and Chanel air-kissed, while men in Tom Ford tuxedos discussed mergers over 30-year-old scotch. This was a world where net worth determined worth, where the right last name opened every door, and where skin color still mattered more than most would ever admit. Scarlett Whitmore held court at the center of it all, a vision in crimson silk that cost more than some people earned in a year. At 35, she had inherited the Whitmore real estate empire and ran it with an iron fist wrapped in Hermes leather. Her date for the evening, Trent Ashford, stood beside her like a Ken doll come to life, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, his ego even sharper. Trent flew private jets for the ultra-rich, and he never let anyone forget it. Beside Scarlett, her best friend Imogen Fairchild sipped champagne and whispered poison disguised as gossip. The 3 of them formed a triangle of wealth, privilege, and casual cruelty that had never been challenged, never been checked, never faced consequences. That was about to change. Ezekiel Robinson moved through the crowd with a tray of Dom Perignon, his black and white server's uniform crisp and professional. At 38, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that most people in the room never noticed because they never truly saw service workers at all. To them, he was invisible furniture, a means to an end, hands that delivered drinks and cleared plates without possessing thoughts, dreams, or dignity. Zeke had worked dozens of events like this over the past year, always watching, always documenting, always waiting for the perfect moment to expose the rot beneath the glamorous surface. He had learned to anticipate the casual insults, the impatient snaps of fingers, the way eyes slid past him as if he didn't exist. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the air crackled with possibility. As he approached Scarlett's group with a fresh tray of champagne, he heard Imogen complaining about her pilot calling in sick. "I swear good help is impossible to find anymore," she whined, oblivious to the irony. Scarlett laughed and gestured toward the gleaming harbor visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Speaking of pilots, my new Gulfstream arrived yesterday." "Trent's dying to fly it, aren't you, darling?" Trent puffed his chest. "That baby's got Rolls-Royce engines and can fly 7,000 nautical miles without refueling. Only the best pilots can handle her properly." He said this loudly enough for nearby guests to admire him. Zeke stepped forward to offer champagne, careful to keep his movements smooth and unobtrusive. That's when it happened. A woman in a silver gown turned suddenly, bumping Zeke's arm. The tray tilted. Champagne splashed across Scarlett's crimson dress in a golden cascade. The ballroom seemed to freeze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Scarlett's face transformed from surprise to fury in less than a second. "You clumsy idiot." She shrieked, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? Of course you don't. People like you could never afford anything like this." She grabbed a napkin and dabbed uselessly at the spreading stain, her movements jerky with rage. Zeke immediately set down the tray and pulled out a clean cloth. "I'm terribly sorry, ma'am. Please allow me to help cover the cleaning costs." His voice remained calm, professional, controlled. This only seemed to infuriate Scarlett more. Imogen stepped forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "Oh, how generous! As if you could afford to clean a dress worth $40,000. These people can't even serve drinks properly and you expect them to take responsibility." The way she said these people made it crystal clear she wasn't just talking about service workers. The racial undertone hung in the air like smoke. Zeke felt the familiar burn of anger in his chest, but he'd learned long ago to channel it, to use it as fuel rather than letting it consume him. He met Scarlett's eyes directly, something that clearly unsettled her. In his gaze, she saw not fear or submission, but something that looked disturbingly like pity. Trent decided to play hero. "You know what? This is unacceptable. I'm calling the hotel manager. You should be fired for this." He pulled out his phone with theatrical flair. Scarlett touched his arm. "Wait, darling. I have a better idea." A cruel smile spread across her face. She looked Zeke up and down, her eyes lingering with obvious disdain. "You're a man, right? All men dream of being pilots, flying powerful machines, being in control. Isn't that what you people aspire to?" Zeke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he said nothing. Scarlett continued warming to her theme as a small crowd gathered. "Here's a deal for you. Tomorrow afternoon at 3, come to my private hangar at Opelika Executive Airport. Fly my $80 million Gulfstream perfectly, and I'll marry you. Can you imagine a nobody like you marrying a billionaire like me? You'd be set for life." She turned to her friends, who burst into laughter. Imogen clutched her sides. "Oh my God, Scarlett, you're terrible," as if he could even start the engines. Trent grinned. "This should be entertaining. I'll make sure to record the whole disaster." The crowd buzzed with amusement. A few guests looked uncomfortable, but said nothing, unwilling to challenge Scarlett Whitmore and risk social exile. Wealth bought silence as effectively as it bought anything else. Zeke stood perfectly still for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, in a voice that carried surprising authority, he replied, "I accept your challenge, Miss Whitmore. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. at your private hangar. I'll fly your jet." The laughter stopped abruptly. Scarlett blinked, genuinely surprised. "You're serious? Completely serious? You offered marriage if I fly your aircraft successfully. I'm holding you to your word." He said this without a trace of irony or fear. Scarlett recovered quickly, her smile returning. "Well then, I can't wait to watch you fail spectacularly. Don't be late, and don't think you can back out. I'll have cameras ready." She turned away dismissively already, pulling out her phone to text her social media manager. This was going to be viral gold. As the crowd dispersed and the gala resumed its rhythm of champagne and small talk, Zeke quietly returned his tray to the service station. He removed his server's jacket in the staff area, revealing a crisp white dress shirt. He walked out the service entrance into the humid Miami night, where a black Rolls-Royce Phantom waited by the curb. The driver, an older gentleman, opened the rear door. "Good evening, Captain Robinson." "How did it go?" Zeke slid into the leather seat and loosened his tie. "Perfectly, Marcus." She took the bait completely. "Tomorrow we finish what Naomi started." Marcus nodded solemnly. "She would be proud, sir." As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the Fontainebleau, Zeke looked at the twinkling lights of Miami's skyline and allowed himself a small, sad smile. Tomorrow, Scarlett Whitmore would learn that assumptions cost more than any dress ever could. The Miami sun hammered down on the Opelika Executive Airport tarmac with brutal intensity, heat shimmering off the concrete in visible waves. At precisely 2:45 p.m., a small crowd had already gathered at Scarlett's private hangar, drawn by social media posts promising entertainment at the expense of an arrogant black man who dared to think he could fly. Scarlett stood at the center of it all in white linen pants and a silk blouse, looking every inch the billionaire heiress ready to humiliate someone for sport. Imogen flanked her right-side phone, already recording. Trent stood to her left, arms crossed, wearing his pilot's wings pin like a badge of superiority. 15 of their closest friends formed a semicircle of privilege, champagne glasses already in hand despite the early afternoon hour. Someone had even set up a professional camera on a tripod. This was going to be documented for posterity, a cautionary tale about knowing one's place in the social hierarchy. At 2:50, Dorian Webb arrived, Scarlett's chief aviation engineer. He was a stocky white man in his 50s, with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails and decades of experience maintaining aircraft for the wealthy. Dorian prided himself on his expertise and had little patience for amateurs, especially those he considered beneath him. At 2:58, a plain Uber pulled up to the hangar entrance. The crowd's murmuring increased. Zeke stepped out wearing simple dark jeans, a navy polo shirt, and clean white sneakers. He carried no bag, no flight case, nothing that suggested he was prepared for what he'd promised to do. Scarlett's friends immediately began whispering and laughing. "Is he serious?" someone muttered. "He looks like he's going to the mall, not flying an $80 million jet," another added. Imogen zoomed her phone camera in on his face. "This is already gold. Look how calm he is. He has no idea how badly this is going to go." Zeke approached the group with measured steps, his expression neutral. Scarlett stepped forward to greet him with exaggerated politeness. "Oh good, you actually showed up. I half expected you to chicken out. After all, this isn't serving drinks, is it?" the crowd tittered. Zeke met her eyes steadily. "I keep my word, Miss Whitmore. Always have, always will." Dorian stepped between them, looking Zeke up and down with obvious skepticism. "All right, boy, before we waste everyone's time, you got any kind of license? Any credentials at all?" The word boy hung in the air with its historical weight. Zeke reached into his back pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. From it, he extracted a card and handed it to Dorian. "My license, currently valid." Dorian snatched it and examined it closely, his expression shifting from smugness to confusion to something approaching shock. "This is an ATP license, airline transport pilot. The highest certification." He looked up at Zeke with narrowed eyes. "Where'd you get this?" "I earned it," Zeke replied simply. Dorian flipped the card over, checking for signs of forgery. The license looked legitimate, with official FAA holograms and Zeke's photo clearly visible. But Dorian wasn't about to let facts interfere with his assumptions. He handed it back with a dismissive snort. "Probably bought it on the black market. I've seen fake licenses before. Let's see if you can even start the engines without blowing something up." Scarlett waved her hand impatiently. "Enough chatter. Let's get to the good part. Here are the rules, since apparently we're actually doing this ridiculous thing." She counted on her perfectly manicured fingers. 1, you'll fly from here to Key West and back. That's about 200 nautical miles round trip. 2, you have to execute a perfect crosswind landing when you return because the weather report shows winds picking up. 3, absolutely 0 mistakes, not a single error. If you succeed— She paused for dramatic effect, her friends leaning in. "I'll actually consider my offer. Though, honestly, I can't imagine you'll get the engine started." She turned to her audience. "And if he fails, he has to get on his knees, right here, apologize to all of us for wasting our time, and admit on camera that he's not qualified to do anything except serve drinks." The crowd applauded as if she just announced something clever rather than cruel. Zeke stood silent for a moment, then spoke in a voice that carried unexpected authority. "And when I succeed, Miss Whitmore, I expect you to honor your word with the same commitment you expect from me." Something in his tone made Scarlett's smile flicker, but she recovered. Of course. Now stop stalling and get in the cockpit. We're all dying to see this disaster unfold." Zeke walked toward the gleaming Gulfstream G650. The aircraft sat on the tarmac like a sleeping predator, all sleek lines and powerful engines. 75 feet of aerospace engineering, representing the pinnacle of private aviation. 2 Rolls-Royce BR 725 engines, capable of producing 16,900 pounds of thrust each. A cockpit packed with sophisticated avionics that required extensive training to master. As Zeke approached the stairs leading to the cabin door, he paused and looked up at the aircraft with an expression that Scarlett couldn't quite read. It wasn't intimidation. It looked almost like recognition, like greeting an old friend. He climbed the stairs with easy familiarity, disappearing into the fuselage. Inside the hangar, Dorian pulled up the cockpit camera feed on a large monitor so everyone could watch. The screen showed Zeke settling into the captain's seat on the left side of the cockpit. His movements were efficient, practiced. He adjusted the seat height and position with quick precision. He put on the headset. He began running through the pre-flight checklist, his hands moving across the instrument panel with startling confidence. Dorian leaned closer to the monitor, frowning. "He knows where everything is," he muttered. Trent laughed. "Lucky guesses. Watch, he'll hit the wrong switch any second now." But Zeke didn't hit the wrong switch. His fingers found the battery master switch, the fuel pumps, the hydraulic pumps, working through the startup sequence with textbook accuracy. When he reached for the radio, his voice came through the hangar, speakers clearly. "Miami Tower, this is Gulfstream, November 72 Whiskey Bravo, requesting clearance for VFR flight to Key West." The crowd went silent. That wasn't the voice of someone uncertain or faking. That was the voice of command, calm and professional. The tower's response crackled through. "Gulfstream, November 72 Whiskey Bravo, Miami Tower. Cleared for takeoff, runway 09. Winds 270 at 15 knots. Altimeter 3012. Cleared for takeoff, runway 09. Winds 270 at 15. Altimeter 3012. November 72 Whiskey Bravo." Zeke repeated back perfectly, following standard communication protocol. Scarlett felt the first flutter of unease in her stomach, but she pushed it down. This proved nothing. Anyone could memorize a few radio calls. Flying the actual aircraft was completely different. As the engines began to spool up with their distinctive high-pitched whine building to a roar, Imogen turned to Scarlett. "Are you sure this is a good idea? What if he actually crashes your plane?" Scarlett waved dismissively, but her voice held less certainty. "He won't get that far. He'll probably panic during takeoff and abort." From the back of the crowd, a quiet voice spoke up. "He's not going to panic." Everyone turned to see an elegant black woman in her late 60s, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, approaching the group. She carried herself with a dignity that commanded attention. Scarlett frowned. "I'm sorry, who are you? This is a private event." The woman smiled sadly. "My name is Mabel Harrison. I run the Tuskegee Airmen Legacy Foundation. And you, Miss Whitmore, have no idea what you've just done." Before Scarlett could respond, the Gulfstream's engines reached full power. The aircraft began rolling forward, Zeke's voice calm on the radio, confirming his departure. The nose turned toward the runway with smooth precision. Scarlett watched her $80 million jet taxi away, piloted by a man she'd assumed was nothing more than a clumsy waiter, and for the first time, genuine doubt crept into her mind like cold water seeping through a crack. What if she'd been wrong? The thought was so foreign, so uncomfortable, that she immediately rejected it. But it lingered anyway, growing stronger with every second that Zeke controlled her aircraft with undeniable skill. Mabel Harrison watched the jet position itself on the runway and whispered, "She has no idea. None of them do." Her eyes held both sadness and something that looked like satisfaction. Justice, she thought, sometimes wears the most unexpected faces. The Gulfstream's engines screamed as Zeke advanced the throttles, the aircraft trembling with barely contained power. Inside the hangar, the crowd watched the departure on Dorian's monitor, some still holding champagne glasses, others leaning forward with growing fascination. The crosswind at 15 knots wasn't dangerous, but it required skill to handle during takeoff. Amateur pilots often struggled with it, letting the wind push them off the center line. Zeke compensated perfectly using rudder inputs to keep the nose aligned while the aircraft accelerated. At 130 knots, he rotated smoothly, the nose lifting as the main gear left the runway. The Gulfstream climbed into the brilliant blue sky with the grace of a bird that had always known how to fly. Dorian stared at his instruments, showing the aircraft's telemetry. Airspeed, altitude, heading, rate of climb, every single parameter sat exactly where it should be. "That was a textbook takeoff," he said quietly, almost to himself. Trent heard him and scoffed. "Beginner's luck. Wait until he has to actually navigate somewhere. He'll get lost in 5 minutes." But Zeke didn't get lost. He turned smoothly onto his course, heading for Key West, maintaining exactly the altitude Miami Departure Control had assigned. His radio calls remained crisp and professional. As he leveled off at 12,000 feet, he allowed himself a moment to look out at the Florida coastline, stretching beneath him a ribbon of white sand between Greenland and blue ocean. This view never got old, no matter how many thousands of hours he'd spent in cockpits. Flying wasn't just what he did, it was who he was, woven into his identity as completely as his DNA. He thought about his great-grandfather, who'd been denied pilot training during World War II because of Jim Crow laws. He thought about his grandfather, one of the legendary Tuskegee Airmen who flew combat missions protecting bombers over Europe while fighting for a country that wouldn't let him drink from the same water fountains as white people. He thought about his father, who became only the second black commercial pilot at a major airline and faced death threats for having the audacity to sit in a cockpit. And he thought about Naomi, his wife, the brilliant aerospace engineer who died 3 years ago, having never received the recognition she deserved because too many people couldn't see past her skin color to acknowledge her genius. In the hangar, Mabel Harrison decided it was time to educate these people. She approached a small group standing slightly apart from Scarlett's inner circle guests, who seemed uncomfortable with the cruel spectacle but hadn't spoken up. "Excuse me," Mabel said gently. "May I share something with you?" A middle-aged couple turned to her. The woman nodded. "Of course." Mabel gestured toward the monitor, showing Zeke's perfect flight path. "That man flying that aircraft is Captain Ezekiel Robinson. He served 12 years in the United States Air Force, flying combat missions in both Afghanistan and Iraq. He has over 8,000 flight hours. He's certified on F-16 fighters C-130 cargo planes and virtually every civilian aircraft ever built. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross for valor. After leaving the military, he became one of the youngest Czech airmen at a major commercial airline, meaning he was responsible for training and certifying other pilots." The couple's eyes widened. Others nearby began listening. Mabel continued, her voice gaining strength. 3 years ago, Captain Robinson's wife Naomi passed away in a car accident. She was an aerospace engineer who faced discrimination her entire career. Before she died, she asked him to fight racism not with anger, but by proving excellence. So he retired from commercial flying and dedicated himself to teaching young black children that they belong in aviation. A man in the gathering crowd asked, "Then why was he working as a waiter at the gala?" Mabel smiled knowingly. He wasn't really working as a waiter. He's been going undercover at elite events for the past year, documenting how people treat service workers, especially black service workers. He's making a documentary about systemic racism in wealthy spaces. Your friend Miss Whitmore just provided him with the perfect finale. The news spread through the crowd like wildfire, people pulling out phones to search Ezekiel Robinson's name. Within minutes, faces around the hangar transformed from amused superiority to shocked realization. Someone found a news article from 2 years ago with the headline, "Hero Pilot Receives Presidential Medal." The photo showed Zeke in full Air Force dress uniform shaking hands with the president. Another person found a video of Zeke giving a speech at the Smithsonian about the Tuskegee Airman legacy. Comments sections filled with praise for his service and his educational work. Slowly, inevitably, people began moving away from Scarlett. Some made quiet exits, not wanting to be associated with what was rapidly becoming a public relations disaster. Others stayed but stopped laughing, stopped drinking, just watching in growing horror as they realized they'd been party to humiliating a genuine American hero. Scarlett felt the shift in energy and grabbed Imogen's arm. "What's happening? Why is everyone acting weird?" Imogen was staring at her phone, her face pale. "Scarlett, I think we made a terrible mistake." "What are you talking about?" Imogen turned her phone screen to show an article about Zeke receiving the Distinguished Flying Cross. Scarlett snatched the phone and read, her hands beginning to shake. No, this couldn't be right. This couldn't be the same person. But the photo was unmistakable. Zeke, in military uniform, medals gleaming on his chest, standing proudly beside an F-16 fighter jet. The article detailed his combat missions, his extraordinary skill, his dedication to service. Scarlett's stomach dropped like a stone. She'd mocked a war hero. She'd humiliated someone who'd risked his life for his country. And she'd done it on camera, in front of witnesses, broadcast on social media for the world to see. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, what have I done?" Trent appeared at her elbow, his face ashen. "Scarlett, we need damage control. We need to stop this right now before it gets worse." But it was already worse. And it was about to get even worse. Still. Over the Florida Keys, Zeke began his descent into Key West International Airport. The island spread beneath him like emeralds scattered on blue velvet. He contacted Key West Tower and received landing clearance. The winds had picked up to 22 knots, with gusts coming from the northwest, creating a significant crosswind for his landing runway. This was the kind of condition that challenged even experienced pilots. Zeke set up his approach with meticulous precision. He configured the aircraft perfectly, extending flaps and landing gear at exactly the right moments. As he descended through 1,000 feet, the crosswind tried to push the aircraft off course. Zeke crabbed the nose into the wind, keeping his ground track aligned with the runway while the aircraft pointed slightly sideways. At 50 feet, he began the transition smoothly, applying rudder to align the nose with the runway while using aileron to prevent drift. The main wheels touched down on the centerline so gently that if there had been passengers, they might have wondered if they'd landed yet. Back in Miami, even Dorian couldn't hide his amazement. That was perfect. That was one of the best crosswind landings I've ever seen. The remaining crowd watched in silence as Zeke taxied to the ramp, shut down the engines, and prepared for the return flight. In the quiet cockpit, Zeke pulled a worn photograph from his shirt pocket. It showed him and Naomi on their wedding day, both in formal Air Force uniforms, her engineering corps insignia next to his pilot wings. "This one's for you, baby," he whispered. "For every dream they tried to kill, every door they tried to close. We're still flying." He kissed the photo gently and tucked it back into his pocket. Then he restarted the engines and prepared to fly back to Miami, where a reckoning waited. As Zeke departed Key West and climbed back toward cruising altitude, the atmosphere in Scarlett's hangar had transformed completely. What began as a champagne-fueled mockery session had devolved into uncomfortable silence punctuated by frantic phone conversations. Scarlett stood frozen in the center of it all, her phone clutched in one trembling hand, watching her entire world collapse in real time. The live stream she'd started so confidently now had over 30,000 viewers, and the comment section had turned from supportive to absolutely savage. "You just humiliated a war hero, you're disgusting," read one comment. "This is the most racist thing I've seen this year, and it's on camera," said another. "Captain Robinson is a legend in aviation. How dare you treat him this way," declared a third. Dozens more flooded in every second, each one another nail in the coffin of Scarlett's reputation. Her Instagram followers were dropping by the hundreds. News outlets had picked up the story. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, none of them good. Imogen approached hesitantly, her earlier cruelty replaced by genuine fear. "Scarlett, my publicist, just called. She says major brands are already pulling away from association with me because I'm in your video. What are we gonna do?" Before Scarlett could answer, Trent made his move. He stepped away from her, deliberately creating physical distance that everyone noticed. "Scarlett, I can't do this. I can't be associated with this disaster." His voice carried across the hangar, ensuring everyone heard. Scarlett turned to him, desperation in her eyes. "Trent, please, I didn't know who he was. I made a mistake." "You made more than a mistake," Trent said coldly. "You assumed a black man couldn't fly because of his skin color. That's not a mistake. That's racism, pure and simple. And I'm not going to let your bigotry destroy my career." He pulled off the pilot's wings pin he always wore and pocketed it. "We're done. Don't call me." He walked away without looking back, leaving Scarlett standing alone. Several of her other friends quickly followed his lead, mumbling excuses and hurrying to their cars. Within 5 minutes, her inner circle had shrunk by more than half. The people who remained did so more out of morbid curiosity than loyalty. Mabel Harrison approached Scarlett directly, now her expression a mixture of sadness and steel. "Miss Whitmore, my name is Mabel Harrison. I run the Tuskegee Airmen Legacy Foundation." Scarlett looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "I know who you are now. Everyone's been telling me." "Good. Then you understand that Captain Robinson volunteers with our organization. He teaches young black children that aviation has no color barrier, that the sky belongs to everyone who has the skill and courage to claim it. He's dedicated his life to breaking down the exact kind of prejudice you displayed tonight." Scarlett's voice cracked. "I'll apologize. I'll delete the video. I'll make this right. Mabel's laugh was bitter. Delete the video. 30,000 people watched it live. It's been screen recorded and shared across every social media platform. News organizations are already running stories. You can't delete what's already everywhere. She pulled out her own phone and showed Scarlett a headline from a major news website: Billionaire heiress humiliates decorated war veteran in racist stunt. Another read, white privilege on display, socialite mocks hero black pilot. Scarlett felt bile rise in her throat. This will ruin me. Yes, Mabel agreed simply. It will. And perhaps that's appropriate. Do you know how many talented black people face this kind of dismissal every single day? How many are overlooked, underestimated, mocked for daring to aspire to excellence? You're facing consequences for one incident. Captain Robinson and people like him face this their entire lives. Dorian's voice cut through the tension. He's 15 minutes out from Miami. And the winds have increased to 28 knots, with gusts to 35. That's going to be a challenging landing. Everyone's attention shifted back to the monitors. Despite everything, they were all invested now in seeing how this ended. On the radar screen, the Gulfstream's icon moved steadily toward Miami. Zeke's course corrections, minimal and precise. His voice came over the radio, calm as ever. Miami Tower, Gulfstream, November 7-2 Whiskey Bravo, 15 miles south, inbound with information, Charlie. Gulfstream 7-2 Whiskey Bravo, Miami Tower, winds 280 at 28 gusting 35, runway 09 cleared to land. Those were serious winds, nearly 40 miles per hour, gusting even higher, hitting the runway from the side. Scarlett knew enough about aviation from owning her jet to understand that this was genuinely dangerous. A small, selfish part of her hoped he'd struggle, that he'd make a mistake, that somehow this would prove she hadn't been completely wrong. But a larger part of her, the part that was beginning to understand the magnitude of her error, desperately hoped he'd land safely. Now, before we see how Captain Robinson handles this dangerous landing, I want to hear from you. Comment number 1 if you think Scarlett deserves what's happening to her, or comment number 2 if you believe people can learn from their mistakes. Hit that like button if you're as shocked as I am by how this story is unfolding, and make sure you're subscribed, because you won't believe what happens when Zeke finally lands this plane. The question everyone's asking is this: even if Scarlett apologizes, even if she tries to make amends, can someone who displayed such casual racism really change? Or is this who she truly is, beneath the designer clothes and inherited wealth? And what will Captain Robinson do when he steps out of that cockpit and faces the woman who tried to humiliate him in front of the world? Hold on to your seats, because the landing is just the beginning of this incredible confrontation. Everything Scarlett thought she knew about herself, about the world, about power and privilege, is about to be turned completely upside down. Let's see how one of America's finest pilots handles the most watched landing of his career. Zeke descended through 5,000 feet, the Miami skyline growing larger in his windscreen. He'd flown through worse conditions in combat zones, where people were actively trying to kill him, but this approach carried different stakes. 30,000 people were watching live. Every black child who'd ever been told they didn't belong in a cockpit was watching. Every person who'd ever been judged by their appearance rather than their ability was watching. This wasn't just a landing. It was a statement. At 3,000 feet, turbulence from the strong winds began buffeting the aircraft. The Gulfstream shuddered and bounced, but Zeke's hands remained steady on the controls, making small, precise corrections. His years of military training had taught him to stay calm when everything around him was chaos. This wind was nothing compared to landing on a carrier deck at night or bringing a damaged fighter home on one engine. He configured the aircraft for landing, extending flaps, incrementally lowering the landing gear with a solid thunk that reverberated through the airframe. The approach checklist flowed through his mind automatically, muscle memory built from thousands of repetitions. In the hangar, people stood transfixed by the monitor showing the nose camera view. The runway appeared in the distance, a gray strip surrounded by grass and taxiways. The crosswind became visible as the aircraft's nose pointed distinctly left of the runway, while the flight path remained aligned, the crab angle compensating for the wind, trying to push them sideways. "He's got a 20-degree crab," Dorian muttered. At these wind speeds, if he doesn't transition perfectly at the right moment, he'll either land hard on one gear or drift off the runway completely. Scarlett found herself holding her breath. She'd witnessed plenty of landings from inside aircraft, but watching from outside, seeing the challenges so clearly displayed, understanding the skill required, was entirely different. Why had she assumed he couldn't do this? What made her so certain that a black man serving champagne couldn't possibly be qualified to fly? The answer sat heavy and ugly in her stomach. She'd assumed, because she'd been raised to assume, taught subtly and not so subtly, that certain people belonged in certain places. That hierarchy wasn't just about wealth, but about inherent worth determined by skin color. She'd never examined those beliefs because they benefited her, made her feel superior without having to earn it. Now, watching a man demonstrate extraordinary skill in the face of her mockery, those beliefs crumbled to dust. At 500 feet, Zeke began his transition from crab to side slip. He smoothly applied right rudder, aligning the nose with the runway, while simultaneously applying left aileron to prevent the wind from drifting the aircraft right. The Gulfstream's right wing dipped slightly as it counteracted the crosswind, the aircraft now flying in a controlled slip toward the runway. Inside the cockpit, his eyes moved in a practiced scan: airspeed, altitude, descent rate, runway alignment, wind correction. Everything had to be perfect. At 100 feet, he made a tiny power adjustment, decreasing his descent rate slightly. At 50 feet, he began the flare, gradually pulling back on the yoke to arrest the descent and slow the aircraft's sink rate. The right main gear touched first, exactly as planned in a crosswind landing, followed a second later by the left main gear. The nose wheel settled onto the pavement with barely a bump. The landing was so smooth that if there had been a glass of water in the cockpit, it would have barely rippled. In the hangar, absolute silence reigned for 3 heartbeats. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Within seconds, half the remaining crowd was applauding, unable to deny what they'd just witnessed. Dorian exhaled sharply. That was perfect. Absolutely perfect. That's the best crosswind landing I've seen in 30 years of aviation. Zeke taxied the Gulfstream back to the hangar, his movements efficient and professional. He shut down the engines, completed the post-flight checklist, and sat in the quiet cockpit for a moment. He could see the crowd through the windscreen, see Scarlett standing in the center looking small and lost. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction in her downfall. He felt tired of having to prove himself. Tired of being exceptional just to be considered equal. Tired of fighting battles his grandfather had fought, his father had fought, that his children would probably still fight, but he also felt purpose. Every young person watching this would see that excellence cannot be denied, that prejudice can be challenged, that dignity is claimed, not given. He unbuttoned his polo shirt and removed it, revealing a t-shirt underneath with a Tuskegee Airman Legacy logo and the words "Breaking Barriers" since 1941 emblazoned across the chest. He opened the cabin door and descended the stairs, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd parted as he approached, some people looking guilty, others admiring still. Others simply shocked into silence. Scarlett stood directly in his path, her face streaked with tears, her earlier arrogance completely gone. "Captain Robinson, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know about your service, your accomplishments. Please, I'll do anything. I'll make a public apology. I'll donate money to your programs, whatever you want." Her voice broke on the last words. Zeke stopped 3 feet from her and looked at her steadily. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the hangar. "You didn't need to know who I was, Miss Whitmore. You should have treated me with respect because I'm a human being. My uniform, my credentials, my net worth, none of that should determine whether I deserve basic dignity." Scarlett flinched as if struck. I know that now. Do you?" Zeke interrupted gently but firmly. "Because I'm not special. I'm just one of thousands of black pilots, black engineers, black professionals who face exactly what you displayed today. Every single day. The only difference is most of them don't have combat medals or presidential citations to force you to acknowledge their worth." He gestured to the crowd around them. "You saw a black man serving drinks, and your first assumption was incompetence. You created a public spectacle designed to humiliate me, to remind me and everyone watching of what you considered my proper place in the social order. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice rooted in racism so casual you didn't even recognize it. Scarlett had no response. What could she possibly say? Zeke turned slightly, addressing not just her, but everyone watching, including the 35,000 people now viewing the live stream. I didn't accept your challenge to prove anything to you. I did it for every black child watching who's been told they don't belong in a cockpit, in a boardroom, in a classroom, anywhere that power and prestige reside. We've always belonged. From the Tuskegee Airmen to the astronauts, from the engineers to the CEOs, we've built, we've flown, we've led, and we've excelled, despite people like you telling us we couldn't. He paused, letting his words sink in. You offered to marry me if I flew your jet successfully. Well, I flew it perfectly. But I wouldn't marry someone with so much prejudice in their heart if you were the last person on Earth. Keep your money, your jet, your privilege. I have something you can't buy, self-respect, and the respect of people who matter. With that, Zeke walked past Scarlett toward the hangar exit. The crowd parted like water. As he reached the door, a commotion erupted near the parking area. A group of about 15 young people, teenagers mostly, came running toward the hangar calling out, "Captain Zeke! Captain Zeke!" They were students from his aviation program, mostly black and Hispanic kids from underserved communities. They must have been watching the live stream and rushed over as soon as he landed. The teenagers swarmed Zeke, hugging him, talking excitedly all at once. A young black girl, maybe 14 years old, looked up at him with shining eyes. "Captain Zeke, we saw everything. You showed them. You showed the whole world." Zeke knelt down to her level, his stern expression finally softening. "Keisha, I didn't do this to show anyone anything. I did this to remind you and everyone like you that you belong anywhere your talent and work ethic can take you. Don't let anyone tell you different." A boy chimed in. "That landing was sick. The crosswind was gnarly. And you just handled it like it was nothing." Zeke smiled. It wasn't nothing. It required training, practice, discipline, and respect for the aircraft and the weather. All things I teach you in class, right? Excellence isn't magic. It's preparation, meeting opportunity. As he stood, surrounded by his students, their joy and pride washing over him, Zeke felt his eyes burning. These kids. This was why he did everything. Not for revenge against people like Scarlett, not for recognition, but for the next generation, who deserved better than the world his generation had inherited. Behind him, Scarlett watched the scene and finally understood. This wasn't about her at all. She was irrelevant to Zeke's mission, just an obstacle he'd stepped over on his way to something far more important. The realization of her own insignificance in his story was somehow worse than any insult he could have thrown at her. She'd thought she had power, but real power she now understood wasn't money or status. It was purpose. It was impact. It was leaving the world better than you found it. And she'd spent her entire life doing the opposite. Mabel Harrison appeared at Scarlett's elbow. "Now you begin to understand what really matters. The question is, what will you do with that understanding?" Scarlett watched Zeke laugh with his students and felt something crack open in her chest. She didn't know the answer to Mabel's question, but for the first time in her life, she desperately wanted to find out. 1 week later, Scarlett Whitmore sat alone in her penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay, though calling it sitting was generous. She'd barely moved from her couch in days, unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to escape the nightmare her life had become. The video of her mocking Zeke had been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. It had been featured on every major news network, dissected by social commentators, turned into memes, and used as a teaching example in diversity training seminars. She'd become the face of privilege and prejudice, a cautionary tale about assumptions and arrogance. The consequences had been swift and devastating. The board of directors at Whitmore Real Estate had called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as CEO. Her father, Preston Whitmore, the company's founder, had issued a public statement disowning her actions and announcing his retirement to distance himself from the scandal. The company's stock had dropped 32%, wiping out billions in market value. Shareholders were preparing lawsuits. Business partners were canceling contracts. The Whitmore name, carefully cultivated over 3 generations, had been tarnished, possibly beyond repair. Scarlett's social circle had evaporated completely. Invitations that once filled her calendar had stopped. Friends she'd known for decades wouldn't return her calls. Her Instagram account, once a carefully curated display of luxury and influence with 2 million followers, had lost over half its audience. The remaining followers existed primarily to leave hate comments. Every brand partnership had been terminated. Luxury companies that once begged her to wear their clothes now wanted nothing to do with her. She'd been uninvited from charity boards. Country clubs had quietly suggested she resign her memberships. Even her doorman looked at her differently, his polite greetings now carrying a hint of judgment. The isolation was crushing. For the first time in her privileged life, Scarlett understood what it meant to be unwanted, to have doors closed, to be judged not by her actions moving forward, but by a single recorded moment that would define her forever. Was this what she'd done to countless others throughout her life, with her casual dismissals and cruel assumptions? The thought made her physically ill. Meanwhile, Zeke's life had transformed in the opposite direction. The video of his perfect landing and dignified confrontation had also gone viral, but as an inspiration rather than condemnation. News organizations worldwide had picked up his story. CNN, NBC, BBC, Al Jazeera all ran features about the decorated combat pilot who'd exposed racism while teaching the next generation to fly. Interview requests poured in from every major talk show. Publishers offered book deals. Documentary filmmakers wanted to tell his story. A prominent airline offered him a position as Chief Diversity Officer with a 7-figure salary. A major aerospace company asked him to join their board of directors. Awards committees contacted him about honorary degrees and distinguished service recognition. The Tuskegee Airmen Legacy Foundation, where Mabel Harrison served as director, saw donations increase by 2,000%. In 1 week, they'd raised over $15 million, enough to fund full scholarships for 200 students. Mabel had to hire additional staff just to process the applications flooding in from young people inspired by Zeke's example. The Robinson Flight Academy officially launched with a ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by 3 retired astronauts, a senator, and hundreds of community members. The facility had state-of-the-art flight simulators donated by Boeing, a fleet of training aircraft contributed by various benefactors, and a waiting list of over 300 students. But Zeke turned down most of the lucrative offers. He accepted a few speaking engagements, careful to use those platforms to highlight systemic issues rather than his personal story. He agreed to 1 major interview with 60 Minutes, scheduled for the following month. But mostly he focused on his students. Teaching was where his heart lived, where Naomi's dream continued through him. One afternoon, as he supervised students in the flight simulator, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Captain Robinson, this is Marcus Chen from the National Air and Space Museum. We'd like to add your story to our permanent exhibition on Black aviation pioneers. We believe your recent actions demonstrate the continuing relevance of the Tuskegee Airman legacy. Zeke felt a lump in his throat. I'm honored, Mr. Chen, but I'm not a pioneer. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. That's exactly the humility that makes you worth honoring, Captain. The giants would be proud. After the call ended, Zeke sat quietly in his office, looking at the photo of Naomi on his desk. "We did it, baby," he whispered. "Your dream is flying." Across town, Scarlett made a decision. She couldn't undo what she'd done, but perhaps she could start trying to understand it. She researched therapists who specialized in unpacking privilege and prejudice, eventually finding Dr. Patricia Williams, a Black woman with a PhD in social psychology, who'd written extensively about racism in elite spaces. The first session was excruciating. Dr. Williams didn't coddle her or offer easy absolution. She asked hard questions. When you saw Mr. Robinson serving drinks, what was your first thought? I don't know. I didn't really think about it. That's precisely the problem, Scarlett. You didn't think about him as a complete human being with a full life and history. He was a servant, a function invisible except when you needed something or when he inconvenienced you. That dehumanization is how racism operates in supposedly polite society. Scarlett wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she couldn't. It was true. She'd looked right through Zeke until the champagne spilled, and then she'd seen him only as someone to blame and humiliate. Dr. Williams continued, "You were raised in an environment where your whiteness and wealth created a bubble. Inside that bubble, certain people existed to serve you, and they were overwhelmingly people of color. You never examined why that was or what it meant. You just accepted it as natural order." Over the following sessions, Scarlett began the painful work of examining her entire life through a new lens. Every assumption, every casual comment, every time she'd clutched her purse tighter around black men or been surprised when a person of color spoke articulately or expected service workers to be grateful for her presence. The patterns were everywhere once she learned to see them. One night, she forced herself to watch the full video of the incident again. She saw her own face twisted with contempt, heard her voice dripping with mockery, watched herself perform cruelty for an audience. The woman on that screen was a stranger, except she wasn't. That was her. That was who she'd been. Maybe still was in some deep place she hadn't yet excavated. She cried until she had no tears left. But crying wasn't action. Feeling bad wasn't change. Dr. Williams had been clear about that. Guilt is useless unless it motivates different behavior. White guilt especially is often just another way of centering yourself in a story that shouldn't be about you. What matters is what you do next. So Scarlett began doing. She quietly liquidated some assets and donated $5 million to the Robinson Flight Academy anonymously. At first, though, Mabel Harrison tracked down the source and called to acknowledge it. "Money is a start, Miss Whitmore. But money from people like you has always been available. What's rare is actually changing the systems that create the need for charity in the first place." "I know," Scarlett said quietly. "I'm trying to learn how to do that." She started working with a nonprofit organization focused on fair housing, taking the lowest position available, answering phones, and filing paperwork. Her coworkers knew who she was and treated her with suspicion. She didn't blame them. She kept her head down and worked. When a black colleague made a pointed comment about privilege, Scarlett bit back her defensive response and simply said, "You're right. I'm trying to do better." It felt inadequate, but it was honest. She attended anti-racism workshops, where she was often the only white person, and had to sit with her discomfort as people shared experiences of discrimination. She read books by black authors about history she'd never been taught. She watched documentaries about redlining, mass incarceration, educational inequity, all the structures that created the disparities she'd benefited from without questioning. Slowly, painfully, Scarlett began to understand that her incident with Zeke wasn't an aberration. It was the logical outcome of a lifetime of conditioning of systems designed to elevate people like her and diminish people like him. And those systems were still operating. The question was what she would do about it. 2 weeks after the incident, Captain Ezekiel Robinson sat in a professional studio for his interview with 60 Minutes correspondent Leslie Caldwell. The cameras were ready, the lights positioned, and millions would watch this broadcast. But Zeke felt calm. He'd faced enemy fire. He'd landed damaged aircraft. He'd buried his wife. A television interview held no fear. Leslie opened with the obvious question. "Captain Robinson, the video of your confrontation with Scarlett Whitmore has been seen by over 60 million people worldwide, but most of them don't know the full story. Can you tell us why you were working undercover as a server?" Zeke nodded. 3 years ago, my wife Naomi died in a car accident. She was an aerospace engineer, brilliant beyond measure. But throughout her career, she faced constant discrimination. People assumed she was a secretary, not a scientist. Her ideas were dismissed until a white male colleague repeated them. She was passed over for promotions despite being the most qualified candidate. It wore her down, Leslie. It killed her spirit long before the accident killed her body. His voice remained steady, but pain flickered across his face. "Before she died, Naomi made me promise something. She said, 'Don't let hatred win. Teach our children to fly above it.' So I retired from commercial aviation and started working with young people, trying to create opportunities she never had." But I also wanted to document what she experienced, to show people how casual and systemic racism operates in elite spaces. Leslie leaned forward. So you went undercover? Yes. For 14 months I worked as a waiter, a janitor, a valet at high-end events in Miami, New York, Los Angeles. I wore hidden cameras and documented how people treated service workers, particularly black service workers. What I captured was stunning in its consistency. The assumptions, the dismissals, the casual cruelty people display when they think no one important is watching. He pulled out a small device. I have over 200 hours of footage. Scarlett Whitmore's incident was just the most dramatic example. Leslie's eyes widened. You have footage from before the gala incident, hours of it. From that same event, before the champagne spilled, I recorded conversations where Scarlett and her friends made explicitly racist comments about the servers, about the neighborhoods they drove through to get there, about their assumptions regarding who deserves wealth and who deserves to serve them, all while smiling and attending a charity event supposedly helping disadvantaged children. The interview continued for 90 minutes, though only 15 would air in the final broadcast. Zeke explained his military service, his training philosophy, his hopes for the next generation. He showed photos of his students, kids from communities that had been systematically denied resources and opportunities, now learning to fly. These young people are extraordinary, Zeke said, his face lighting up. They work twice as hard because they know they'll be judged twice as harshly. They excel not because they're superhuman, but because they're determined not to let prejudice define their limits. My job is to give them the skills and confidence to claim the sky that's always belonged to them. Leslie asked the question many viewers would be wondering. Captain Robinson, do you hate Scarlett Whitmore? Zeke was quiet for a moment. No. I pity her. She's a product of systems that taught her she's inherently superior based on her race and class. Those systems damaged her humanity, made her smaller and meaner than she could have been. But she's also responsible for her choices. Pity doesn't erase accountability. Have you spoken to her since the incident? No, and I don't plan to. Her journey to understanding what she did and why isn't my responsibility. I'm not a tool for white people's redemption. My energy goes to my students, to building the world Naomi dreamed of. Your documentary is scheduled to premiere at Sundance Film Festival next month. What do you hope viewers take away from it? Zeke looked directly into the camera. I hope they examine their own assumptions. I hope they understand that racism isn't just slurs and violence. It's the everyday indignities, the constant dismissals, the exhausting work of proving your humanity to people who should recognize it automatically. And I hope white viewers especially understand that this isn't a black problem to solve. This is a system they benefit from and therefore a system they're responsible for dismantling. The interview concluded with Leslie asking about his great-grandfather who'd been denied pilot training during World War II. Zeke's voice grew thick with emotion. He wanted to fly so badly. He'd watch planes overhead and dream. But Jim Crow laws said no. My grandfather got his chance. With the Tuskegee Airmen fought for a country that didn't respect him, came home to segregation and threats. My father broke barriers at commercial airlines, faced death threats for sitting in a cockpit. I flew combat missions for America and still get profiled driving through certain neighborhoods. He paused, composing himself. Every time one of my students solos for the first time takes their first flight alone, I think about my great-grandfather watching those planes. I think about all the dreams deferred and denied. And I think we owe it to those who came before and those who will come after to keep breaking barriers until there are no barriers left to break. When the interview aired the following Sunday, it drew the show's highest ratings in 5 years. Social media erupted with support for Zeke and renewed criticism of Scarlett. But more importantly, applications to flight schools from minority students increased by 300% nationwide in the following month. Zeke's documentary, titled Flying While Black, A Captain's Journey Through American Racism, premiered at Sundance to a standing ovation. Netflix acquired distribution rights for $8 million, all of which Zeke donated to aviation scholarships. When the documentary released globally, it spent 3 weeks as the #1 film on the platform. In a particularly powerful scene, the documentary showed Scarlett's incident in full, then cut to interviews with other Black professionals, engineers, doctors, lawyers, executives, all describing similar moments when their competence was questioned because of their race. The pattern was undeniable and heartbreaking. But the film ended on hope, showing Zeke's students graduating, receiving their licenses, dreaming of futures that seemed impossible just months before. Critics praised the documentary's balance of hard truth and inspiration. It was nominated for an Academy Award. Suddenly, conversations about everyday racism dominated dinner tables and boardrooms across America. Companies scrambled to examine their diversity initiatives. Universities restructured programs. It wasn't perfect. Change never is. But it was movement, and movement mattered. Throughout it all, Zeke remained focused on his mission. He expanded the Flight Academy, opened a second location in Atlanta, partnered with colleges to create pathways from his program to aerospace engineering degrees. He became a voice for change, but never lost sight of the individuals whose lives he could directly impact. Naomi's dream was taking flight, carried on the wings of young people who refused to be grounded by others' limitations. 1 month after the 60 Minutes interview aired, profound changes rippled through multiple lives. The Robinson Flight Academy had expanded beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a small program in Miami now had locations in Atlanta and Houston, with plans for Chicago and Los Angeles. Over 300 students were enrolled across all locations, receiving world-class flight training completely free of charge. The waiting list stretched into the thousands. Corporate sponsors lined up to fund the program. Boeing donated $5 million and 3 new aircraft. Delta Airlines created a direct pipeline from Zeke's Academy to their pilot training program, guaranteeing interviews for any graduate who met basic qualifications. United Airlines followed suit. Suddenly, a clear pathway existed from underserved communities to commercial cockpits, something that had never existed before at this scale. On a bright Saturday morning, Zeke stood in the Atlanta facility watching his first graduating class prepare for their final check rides. 25 students, ages 14 to 18, stood on the verge of receiving their private pilot licenses. They were Black, Hispanic, Asian, white, representing the diversity of America in a field that had historically been overwhelmingly white and male. Malik Jackson, the 14-year-old from Detroit who'd hugged Zeke after the viral landing, was the star student. Against all odds, from a kid who'd grown up in one of the city's toughest neighborhoods, where helicopters overhead usually meant police surveillance, not dreams of flight, Malik had excelled. He'd studied harder than anyone, arriving early and staying late, asking questions until he understood every concept completely. Today, he'd perform his final solo cross-country flight, the last requirement before receiving his license. Before Malik climbed into the Cessna 172, Zeke pulled him aside. "You ready, Malik?" grinned, nervous energy radiating off him. "I think so, Captain. I've flown this route a dozen times. I know you have. And you'll fly it perfectly today. But I want to tell you something important." Zeke placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. "When you're up there alone flying that airplane, you're going to feel something powerful. Freedom, control, peace. That feeling belongs to you. Nobody gave it to you. You earned it. And nobody can take it away." Malik's eyes glistened. "Captain Zeke, before I met you, I thought people like me didn't get to do stuff like this. I thought the sky belonged to other people. The sky belongs to everyone, with the courage to claim it. Your ancestors knew that. From the Tuskegee Airmen to Mae Jemison in space, we've always been reaching upward. You're part of that legacy now." Malik completed his flight flawlessly, returning with a smile so wide it seemed to split his face. As he taxied to the ramp, the other students and instructors cheered. When he shut down the engine and climbed out, he ran straight to Zeke and hugged him fiercely. "I did it. I really did it. You did indeed. I'm proud of you, son." The graduation ceremony that afternoon was an emotional affair. Parents, who'd never imagined their children would have such opportunities, sat crying in the audience. 3 retired Tuskegee Airmen attended as guests of honor, these men in their 90s who'd broken the first barriers, now watching the next generation soar. Local news covered the event. A senator gave a speech. But the most powerful moment came when Malik, as class valedictorian, addressed the crowd. They told us we didn't belong in the sky, he began, his young voice strong. They told us through the neighborhoods they put us in, the schools they didn't fund, the opportunities they didn't offer. They told us without words that certain dreams weren't for certain people. But Captain Robinson showed us different. He showed us the sky is ours, always has been, always will be. I'm going to NASA one day. I'm going to be an astronaut. And when I'm up there looking down at Earth, I'm going to remember everyone who said I couldn't and prove them wrong with every orbit. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Zeke stood in the back, tears streaming down his face, thinking about Naomi, wishing she could see this. She would have loved, Malik would have pushed him to reach even higher. Her spirit lived in this room, in these students, in this impossible dream made real. After the ceremony, Mabel Harrison approached Zeke. You know, the foundation received another major donation yesterday. Anonymous, but we tracked it down. It was from Scarlett Whitmore. Another $3 million. Zeke's expression was unreadable. What did you tell her? I thanked her. Money is money, and it'll help kids who need it. But I also told her that financial contributions, while appreciated, don't equal redemption. Real change requires more than checks. What did she say? She agreed. Said she's been working at a fair housing nonprofit, lowest position, learning from the ground up. She's in therapy doing the work of unpacking her privilege. I don't know if she'll really change Zeke. Probably too early to tell. But she seems to be trying. Zeke nodded slowly. That's her journey. I hope she makes it. I really do. Not for my sake, but for the next person who serves her coffee or fixes her car or teaches her children. I hope she learns to see people. Meanwhile, in Miami, Scarlett's transformation continued its difficult course. She'd been working at the Sunshine Housing Coalition for 6 weeks now, a nonprofit helping formerly incarcerated women find stable housing. Her co-workers had slowly, grudgingly accepted her presence, though trust remained elusive. She didn't blame them. One afternoon, her supervisor, Keisha Williams, a black woman who'd spent 5 years in prison for a drug offense before rebuilding her life, asked Scarlett to help prepare for a presentation to potential donors. As they worked together, Keisha said quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you really here? You're a billionaire. You could write a check and feel good about yourself. Why show up every day for a job that barely pays and definitely doesn't match your resume?" Scarlett considered the question carefully. "Because writing a check is easy. It requires nothing from me except money I didn't earn anyway. I inherited everything. My comfort, my opportunities, my entire life came from systems that elevated people who look like me while suppressing people who don't. I didn't create those systems, but I benefited from them without question. And when I saw someone who challenged my assumptions, I tried to destroy him." She paused, fighting back tears. "I can't undo that. But I can try to understand how I became someone capable of such casual cruelty. And I can try day by day to do something useful instead of harmful. Working here, listening to the women we serve, seeing how hard they fight for things I took for granted, it's changing me. I don't know if I'll ever be good at this, or if I deserve forgiveness, but I have to try." Keisha studied her for a long moment. "You know what? I believe you. I didn't at first. Thought you were here for image rehab, waiting for the attention to die down so you could go back to your penthouse and forget about us. But you keep showing up. You do the work nobody wants, don't complain, don't ask for special treatment. That counts for something." "Thank you," Scarlett whispered. "Don't thank me yet." Believing you're trying and believing you've changed are different things. You've got years of learning ahead, and you're going to mess up, say the wrong thing, fall back on old patterns. The question is whether you'll stay committed when it gets hard and stops feeling like progress. "I will," Scarlett said with more conviction than she felt. "I have to." That evening, Scarlett attended a community meeting in Overtown, one of Miami's historically black neighborhoods that had been devastated by highway construction that deliberately destroyed thriving communities in the 1,960 seconds. She listened to residents talk about food deserts, police harassment, failing schools, lack of investment. She heard frustration and pain, and also fierce pride and determination. For the first time in her life, Scarlett truly listened, without thinking about how issues affected her or how she could fix them. She just witnessed, learned, sat with her discomfort. After the meeting, an elderly black woman approached her. "You're that girl from the video, aren't you? The one who mocked Captain Robinson?" Scarlett flinched but met the woman's eyes. "Yes, ma'am." "I am." "Mm-hmm. I thought so. What you doing here? Trying to learn? Trying to do better?" The woman looked at her skeptically. "Talk is cheap, baby. Black folks been hearing white folks talk about doing better for 400 years. What we need is action, sustained action, not guilt trips that fade when the next news cycle comes." "You're absolutely right. I'm trying to act, not just feel sorry for myself." "It's slow and I'm bad at it, but I'm trying." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Well, keep trying then. We need all the help we can get, even from people like you. Maybe especially from people like you, since you got access to rooms and power we don't. Just make sure you use that access for us, not to make yourself feel better." "Yes, ma'am. I'll try." As Scarlett drove home that night, through neighborhoods she'd previously only seen through tinted car windows, she felt exhausted and overwhelmed, but also, for the first time since the incident, something like purpose. She was beginning to understand what Mabel and Dr. Williams and Keisha had been trying to tell her. This wasn't about her redemption arc. This was about leveraging her unearned privilege to dismantle the systems that gave her that privilege in the first place. It would take the rest of her life. She might never be forgiven, might always be remembered primarily for her worst moment. But the work mattered regardless. She pulled into her building's garage and sat in her car for a moment. On her phone, she pulled up Zeke's Instagram account, which she'd been following anonymously. His latest post showed Malik and the other graduates all grinning in their flight suits. The caption read, "The sky never had limits. We just had to prove it. Congratulations to the first graduating class of Robinson Flight Academy. You're flying now, and nothing can stop you." Scarlett smiled despite the tears on her cheeks. She'd tried to clip his wings, and instead he'd taught a whole generation to soar. There was poetry in that, painful and beautiful at once. 6 months had passed since the day Scarlett Whitmore mocked a black man at her private hangar, not knowing he was one of America's finest pilots. 6 months since her world imploded and his expanded. 6 months of consequences, learning, growth, and the hard work of change. On a warm Saturday afternoon, the Robinson Flight Academy in Miami held its second graduation ceremony, celebrating 37 new licensed pilots. The facility had transformed from a modest training center into a state-of-the-art aviation campus. New buildings, housing simulators, donated by major airlines, a maintenance hangar where students learned aircraft systems, a classroom wing with computers and aviation libraries. Outside, a fleet of 12 training aircraft sat ready on the ramp, each one representing possibility. The parking lot filled with families, many of them experiencing their first time attending such an event. Parents who worked 2 jobs to make rent now watched their children achieve something previously unimaginable. Grandparents who'd lived through segregation sat in folding chairs crying tears of joy and disbelief. This was the future their ancestors had fought for, the dream deferred, finally coming true. Zeke stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of over 300 people. Media cameras lined the back. Local politicians sat in the front row, eager to associate themselves with this success story. But Zeke's attention focused on his students, these remarkable young people who'd worked so hard to earn their wings. 6 months ago, he began his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. A video went viral of me flying a Gulfstream jet. Many people saw that as a confrontation between me and someone who'd wronged me. But that's not what it was about. It was never about her. It was about you. He gestured to his students. It was about every young person who's been told they don't belong somewhere, who's been judged by their appearance instead of their ability, who's been denied opportunities because of zip codes and skin color and circumstances beyond their control. That flight was a message. You belong. You've always belonged. And now you're proving it. The students erupted in applause. Zeke continued, "Today, 37 of you receive your pilot licenses. But you're not just pilots. You're pioneers, breaking barriers in one of the least diverse fields in America. You're ambassadors, showing the world that excellence has no color. And you're teachers, because I expect each of you to reach back and pull someone else up behind you. That's how we change systems. Not one person at a time, but one generation, teaching the next, exponentially multiplying opportunity and access. He introduced the keynote speaker, an astronaut named Jessica Morrison, who'd been the third Black woman in space. She spoke powerfully about her own journey, the discrimination she'd faced, the determination required to persist. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, calling students forward to receive their licenses. One by one, they walked across the stage. Malik Jackson, now 15, received his license to thunderous applause. He'd already been accepted to a prestigious aerospace engineering program with a full scholarship starting after high school graduation. His mother, a single parent who cleaned houses for a living, couldn't stop crying. "My baby's going to the stars," she kept repeating. A young woman named Sienna Foster received her license next. She'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes, never staying anywhere long enough to build roots. Aviation gave her stability, purpose, and now a career path, as several regional airlines had already expressed interest in her joining their training programs after she accumulated more flight hours. As Zeke handed out licenses, he met each student's eyes and said something personal, a moment of connection that meant everything. To one shy boy who'd struggled with confidence, "You found your voice in the sky. Never lose it." To a girl whose father had been deported, "You're flying for him too. Make him proud." To a student who'd lost a brother to gun violence, "His memory lives in your achievements. Keep rising." Near the back of the crowd, dressed simply in jeans and a plain blouse, Scarlett Whitmore stood watching. She hadn't been invited, but the event was public, and she'd felt compelled to attend. She wanted to witness what her money was helping to build, yes, but more than that, she wanted to see Zeke in his element, doing the work that mattered to him. She'd kept her distance throughout the ceremony, standing behind families trying to be invisible. But as the last license was handed out, and the crowd began mingling, a teenage girl approached her hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Scarlett Whitmore?" Scarlett's heart sank. She'd been recognized. She braced for anger, accusation, the confrontation she probably deserved. "Yes, I am." The girl, Sienna, smiled nervously. "I'm Sienna Foster. I just graduated from the academy. I wanted to say thank you." Scarlett blinked in confusion. "Thank me for what your donation helped fund my training. I know why you gave the money, and I don't know your whole story, but I know that scholarship changed my life. I was aging out of foster care, with nowhere to go, no plan, no future. Now, I'm going to be a pilot. I'm going to fly for a living. That's because of programs like this, and your money helped make it happen." Tears welled in Scarlett's eyes. "I don't deserve your thanks. I did something terrible." "Maybe," Sienna agreed. "I watched the video. It was pretty bad, but people mess up. What matters is what you do after. Captain Zeke taught us that making mistakes doesn't define us. How we respond to our mistakes does. If your response is to help people like me, then thank you." "Seriously?" She held out her hand. After a moment, Scarlett shook it, overwhelmed. "I hope I can keep helping. I hope I can do better." "Then you will," Sienna said, with the confidence of youth. "Good luck, Miss Whitmore." She bounded away to rejoin her friends, leaving Scarlett standing alone, quietly crying. From across the crowd, Zeke had noticed the exchange. He'd been aware of Scarlett's presence from the moment she arrived. You don't survive combat without developing situational awareness. Part of him had wanted to ask her to leave. This was his student's day, not a venue for her rehabilitation. But another part of him, the part that Naomi had nurtured, believed in the possibility of change even when it seemed unlikely. He watched Scarlett wipe her tears and start to leave, walking toward the parking lot. On impulse, he followed. "Miss Whitmore," he called out. Scarlett stopped turning slowly. They faced each other for the first time since the confrontation 6 months ago. She looked different. Thinner, tired, humbler. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving someone who looked lost but searching. "Captain Robinson," she said quietly, "I didn't mean to intrude. I just wanted to see the program. I'm leaving now. Wait." Zeke approached until they stood a few feet apart. "I heard you've been working at Sunshine Housing Coalition. Keisha Williams is my cousin. She says you've been showing up doing the work." Scarlett's eyes widened. "Keisha's your cousin. She never mentioned that." "I asked her not to. I wanted her assessment of you to be genuine, not colored by our history." He paused. "She says you're trying, really trying. That's not nothing." "It's not enough either," Scarlett said. "I can't undo what I did. I can't take back those words or that moment. It's out there forever, defining me, as it should. I was cruel and racist, and I deserve every consequence." "Probably," Zeke agreed. "But the question isn't whether you deserve forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something others choose to give if and when they're ready. I'm not there yet, and I may never be. That's my right." Scarlett nodded, fresh tears falling. "I understand." But Zeke continued, "I've seen what you've been doing. The donations, the work at the nonprofit, the learning. I've heard you've been attending community meetings, listening more than talking. That's a start. A small start, but a start nonetheless." He crossed his arms, considering his next words carefully. "I'm going to tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was younger and angrier. Guilt is useless. It centers you in a story that shouldn't be about you. What matters is action. Sustained, humble, often invisible action to dismantle the systems you benefited from. You'll never be done. This is lifelong work. You'll mess up again, say the wrong thing, fall back on old patterns. The question is whether you'll keep pushing forward anyway." "I will," Scarlett said with quiet conviction. "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I will. Not for redemption or forgiveness or to fix my image. Because it's right. Because I wasted 35 years being part of the problem, and I want to spend whatever time I have left being part of the solution, even in small ways." Zeke studied her, this woman who tried to humiliate him, now standing before him genuinely broken and trying to rebuild into something better. He didn't trust it completely. Time would tell if her change was real or performance. But he believed in the possibility of transformation because he'd seen it in his students, in communities, in himself. "Then I wish you well on that journey, Miss Whitmore. It's a hard road. You'll be tempted to quit when it gets uncomfortable or when people don't acknowledge your efforts. Do the work anyway. Not for applause, but because it needs doing." He extended his hand. After a moment of hesitation, Scarlett shook it. The handshake wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It was acknowledgement. "You're trying. Keep trying." They released hands and stood in awkward silence for a moment. Then Zeke said, "You should come to our next open house. Not as a donor, just as someone learning. See the students, hear their stories, understand what we're building. If you're serious about this work, proximity to the people you're trying to help is essential." "I'd like that," Scarlett said. "Thank you, Captain Robinson." "Zeke. You can call me Zeke." It was a small gesture, but significant. Scarlett managed a tremulous smile. "Thank you, Zeke." As she walked to her car, Scarlett felt something shift inside her. The encounter hadn't absolved her or erased her past, but it had given her something she desperately needed: direction. She knew what to do now. Keep working, keep learning, keep showing up, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Use her privilege to open doors for others instead of closing them. It would never be enough to balance the scales, but it was better than the alternative of giving up, or worse, returning to who she'd been. Zeke watched her drive away, then turned back to the ceremony. Mabel Harrison appeared at his elbow. "That was generous of you." "Was it?" Zeke asked. "I don't know. Part of me wanted to send her away. But Naomi always believed people could change if given the chance and the motivation. I owe it to her memory to believe that too, even when it's hard. She would be proud of you, of all of this." Mabel gestured to the students still celebrating families, taking photos, joy saturating the air. "Look what you've built." Zeke looked at the scene before him, young people who'd been told they didn't belong, now holding licenses that said they absolutely did, families experiencing pride they'd been denied for generations. A future expanding, with every pilot trained, every barrier broken, every dream realized. "I didn't build this alone," Zeke said. "This is built on the sacrifices of the Tuskegee Airmen, the determination of every black person who fought for a seat at a table they were told didn't have room for them, Naomi's dream that refused to die even when she did. I'm just carrying it forward." "And doing it beautifully," Mabel said. One of the students called out to Zeke, waving him over for photos. He smiled and jogged toward them, ready to celebrate their achievement. As cameras flashed and students laughed and parents cried happy tears, Zeke looked up at the sky, that infinite blue expanse that had always represented freedom. Somewhere up there he imagined Naomi watching, smiling that brilliant smile he'd fallen in love with. "We're flying, baby," he whispered. "All of us. And we're not coming down." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tarmac where a dozen training aircraft sat ready for Monday's lessons. Tomorrow, new students would arrive, starting their own journeys from ground to sky. The cycle would continue expanding exponentially, breaking barriers with every takeoff, until the day when a black face in a cockpit was so unremarkable that no one thought to comment. That day wasn't here yet, but it was coming. Zeke could see it in Malik's eyes as the boy talked about NASA. He could hear it in Sienna's voice as she discussed her future with regional airlines. He could feel it in the shift happening across the country as his students became ambassadors for change, living proof that talent has no color and dreams respect no boundaries. This was the real victory, Zeke realized. Not humbling Scarlett, not the viral video, not the awards or recognition. The victory was here. In these students, in their families, in the futures unfolding before them like runways stretching to the horizon. Everything else was noise. This was signal. This mattered. As the celebration continued into the evening, Zeke stood with Mabel, watching the sun set over Miami, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "You know what the best part is?" Mabel asked. "What's that?" "This is just the beginning. These 37 graduates will inspire hundreds more. They'll become instructors, airline pilots, astronauts, aerospace engineers. They'll have children and tell them they can be anything. Each generation will have to fight less than the one before. That's how we change the world. Not overnight, but one pilot, one student, one dream at a time." Zeke nodded, feeling the weight and beauty of that truth. Naomi used to say, "The arc of progress is long, but it bends toward justice." I didn't always believe her, especially when I saw how much work remained, how many battles were still ahead. But standing here, seeing this, I think she was right. The arc is bending, slowly but definitely. "Then let's keep bending it," Mabel said, raising her glass of sparkling cider. "To the next generation of pilots. May they fly higher than we ever imagined." "To the next generation," Zeke echoed. They clinked glasses as the last light faded from the sky, and the first stars appeared, those distant suns that humans had dreamed of reaching since the beginning of time. The dream was universal, but access to it had never been. That was changing now, one student at a time, one flight at a time, one generation teaching the next, that the sky had never been the limit. It was just the beginning. So what do you think? Do people like Scarlett deserve second chances? Or are some actions too harmful to forgive? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, comment number 1 if you believe Captain Robinson handled this situation perfectly. Or comment number 2 if you think he should have been harsher. And here's the real question I want you to consider. What would you have done in Zeke's position? Would you have accepted Scarlett's challenge or walked away? Let me know in the comments, because your perspective matters. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it challenged your assumptions even a little bit, then please hit that like button. It helps more people find stories like this, stories that matter, stories that might change how we see each other. And definitely subscribe to this channel, because we bring you incredible true stories of courage, justice, and the human capacity for both cruelty and redemption. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been counted out, told they don't belong, made to feel less than they are. Let them know that excellence cannot be denied, that dignity is claimed, not given, and that the sky belongs to anyone brave enough to reach for it. Thank you for watching this journey with me. Thank you for caring about stories that highlight both our worst impulses and our greatest possibilities. Remember that we all have the power to choose who we'll be, what we'll stand for, and whether we'll lift others up or tear them down. Choose wisely, choose kindly, choose to be part of the solution. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep fighting for justice, and remember that the person you're tempted to dismiss might just be the hero you never expected. God bless you all, and may you always have clear skies and tailwinds on your own journey toward becoming your best self. This story reveals profound truths about prejudice, assumption, and redemption. Captain Ezekiel Robinson's journey teaches us that excellence transcends the boundaries others try to impose based on race, class, or appearance. His calm dignity in the face of humiliation demonstrates that true power lies not in retaliation, but in purposeful action that uplifts future generations. Scarlett's downfall illustrates how casual racism, the kind that operates through assumptions rather than slurs, can be equally destructive. She never questioned why she immediately dismissed a black man's capabilities, never examined the privilege that allowed her to mock someone publicly without fear of consequences. Her subsequent journey shows that genuine change requires uncomfortable self-examination, sustained action, and acceptance that forgiveness may never come. The story's most important lesson centers on legacy and responsibility. Zeke honored his wife Naomi and his ancestors by transforming personal pain into collective progress, creating pathways for young people who face the same barriers his family fought for generations. This reminds us that our response to injustice matters more than the injustice itself. We can become bitter, or better victims, or victors. Finally, the narrative proves that systems of oppression crumble not through individual acts of revenge, but through collective commitment to education, opportunity, and the persistent belief that every person deserves dignity regardless of their position, profession, or pigmentation. What would you do if you were in Captain Robinson's shoes? Would you accept a challenge designed to humiliate you, or walk away with your dignity intact? Comment below with your answer, because I genuinely want to know how you'd handle such blatant disrespect. And here's another question. Do you believe Scarlett's attempts at redemption are genuine or just damage control? Drop number 1 if you think people can truly change, or number 2 if you believe some actions are unforgivable. Your perspective matters, so share it in the comments. If this story impacted you, if it made you think differently about assumptions we make every day, then smash that like button right now. Seriously, it takes 1 second and helps this message reach people who desperately need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us of our shared humanity. We bring you real accounts of courage, justice, and the complexity of the human experience. Share this video with someone who's been underestimated, overlooked, or told they don't belong somewhere. Send it to someone who needs a reminder that excellence cannot be denied, that dignity is inherent, and that our worst moments don't have to define our entire lives. Share it with educators, parents, anyone working to create a more equitable world. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending time with this story. Thank you for caring about justice, equality, and the hard work of becoming better humans. Remember that every interaction you have is an opportunity to see someone's full humanity or to reduce them to assumptions. Choose to see people. Choose to lift rather than diminish. Choose to be part of the solution. May you always treat others with the dignity you wish to receive. May you challenge your own assumptions before they harm someone else. And may you have the courage to change when you discover you've been wrong. Keep fighting for a world where talent is recognized, regardless of the package it comes in, where opportunity is distributed by merit, not melanin, and where the sky truly belongs to everyone brave enough to reach for it. God bless you all, and until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your heart open to growth.